Hello, my name is Davi Stein. I'm head of 2D at Escape Studios and also a compositing tutor. And I will be doing a tutorial on adding a hot kind of core and animating that on inside this sort of smoke plume element. This was a technique, and variations of this technique were used in the film Narnia. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, that released in 2010, that I worked on at Cinesite in London. So putting this all together, I'll be using a few different nodes, like the Roto Paint node, in order to animate the strokes on. And I'll show you that. I'll go through that. Also using a very popular and very common node, the noise node, which is really helpful for generating a lot of kind of random noise patterns, Perlin noise, which will generate some of the animation as well. And then putting that all together and creating kind of a heat haze, or sort of a distortion of sorts. So let me show you here the image that I put together. So I've animated this on, revealing that center hot core. Added some godrays to that as well. And this is an effect that can be used in a lot of variety of different methods and a lot of variety of different uses. Certainly for something like this, for adding some kind of interactive light on the inside as well of an element, volcano type of element as well. Obviously the color you can choose. Also using this displacement, if I zoom into the element here, that we see generated from the heat, so to speak, you can apply this to other elements that are generating heat distortion from, say, the back of a jet engine, or also other distortions that you may apply to a still image of water that you want to add sort of a ripple to give that a bit of animation. Same idea, so all of these techniques can kind of all be combined and used individually on their own as well. So let's get started, and we'll go through a bit of this script here. Okay, so starting at the top here, I've taken two smoke elements that we have in our library, this one and this one here. And as you see, they're smoke that are generated from two different lighting directions, so that kind of helps, but you don't necessarily need that. They can just be regular smoke elements that you've gotten from a stock library that are animating. And then taken each one, shuffled then, in this case, the blue channel, and then the other one shuffled the red channel out, so I just get now a grayscale version. I've then merge maxed these together so that I have a combination of the two, and I'll come back to this gray node. And then I've taken that blue version and just transformed that a bit over, so I want to create a bit more volume inside that smoke element. And then just apply a slight grade to that, just again bring a little bit more shading. I'll zoom into this area here. They're basically both the same. Just get a little bit more shading, a little bit more emphasizing that lighting direction. And this is again something that you do if you have a fairly flat lit smoke element. You can add your own kind of lighting to that by using roto shapes and just grading through those roto shapes. Bring this all together and then merge max that again, so before and after, creating a bit more volume inside again. And this will be nice when I add that center hot core. It'll give me a little bit more detail in there as well. And then done just transforming that down so that I've got a center plume in that area. One thing with the transform node that's quite helpful, and I can show you, I'll get a brand new transform node and attach that to the previous element. And if we look at the properties, the transform node is right in the center, but I want to just rotate off that center point. So I want to change my pivot, basically, or my center here. And I can just zoom in here and hold Control, and then move that pivot point or that center point first. And I want to do that before I change the actual translation. So then I can move that down and then rotate this around, etc., or put that in whatever direction. So the important thing is to change your center first, or that pivot point, and then move the entire object to wherever you want that. Okay, so that's what I've done here. So now I have a good kind of element that I can start with. It gives me a lot of detail in that center for that core area, and I can also color it in any way that I want to. So moving down through the script here, I've just reformatted all of those elements to just be kind of a 1280 by 720 size. Obviously, you can reformat to any size you want. And then I want to start to animate some kind of stroke in the center that's going to reveal that hot core. Animating a paint stroke on makes it really easy to reveal something in a more procedural way. So I'll demo this here. If I get a Roto Paint node, hotkey P, and if we take a look at this one, and when I want to paint the stroke, it makes it quite handy if I'm looking actually, and I'll just attach this for right now, to the actual smoke element, because I want to be painting and understanding where this element, where the thicker parts are, and what parts eventually that I'm going to want to reveal. So I'll attach that to the reformat node, attach my viewer to that as well. Go and set up a paint brush here, and I'll just go full screen so I can get a bit more detail in here. Change my brush size down a bit, holding hotkey shift. And what I want to do is just paint one entire stroke non-stop so that I can reveal eventually the different parts of the inner part of this smoke element. So I'll start at the bottom, kind of painting through, revealing maybe some of the thick areas, some areas that have some detail. Not making very elaborate stroke, and generally something that it goes through some interesting areas to give you details. So I go back now to my properties. I want to make sure that stroke is just one element, one paint stroke, not a start and stop, or not multiple strokes. It won't work that way, because then I want to create a reveal on, a write on. So if I now go to the lifetime section here, and I want to give this stroke, this one brush stroke that I've selected, a frame range, and it will go from frame 1 to frame 88, which is the length of my smoke here that I have. So that updates here. Then I can go back to the stroke, and down at the bottom it says write on start and write on end. I'll go to my first frame here. And at this point, I can unattach that from the reformat node, because basically now I'm just created a stroke and I want to animate the write on. So on the first frame here, I'll set a keyframe for both the start and the end. So I have a keyframe set up. I'll go to my last frame here and set another keyframe for both properties. And then if I go back to the beginning, and then my write on here, I'm going to bring that value down to 0. So now if I scroll through my timeline, you can see now it's going to animate that write on. Play that out. And you see I've got a really nice, easy procedural way of revealing on that stroke. So at that point then, I'll zoom in a bit. I want to kind of create a frame blend so that I can create a bit more of a blending between these strokes. Right now it's a very kind of a linear, kind of more harder edged stroke. So in my frame blend, I may then change that to number of frames to about maybe 10 or so. And you see it's going to start to blend those frames a bit more and create more in-betweens in order to give a slightly smoother write on. So all of that will add. You can then obviously change the frame blend value here in order to give you more blending and things like that. Also, if I go back to the beginning here, depending again, this is just creative decisions, how soon you want that stroke to reveal. Because I'm also doing the frame blend, the stroke really doesn't reveal, or that hot core that I'm going to end up creating, it's not really going to reveal much until almost frame 20. So I think I may then actually cheat this a little bit. All right. And then go into my stroke, go back to the beginning here. And then I can also bring up that value on that first frame of where I really want that stroke to be a bit more visible, because eventually I'm going to be blurring this a bit as well. I don't want necessarily a hard edge core. So that can also be adjusted to your liking if you want something to reveal on a bit faster. After that, I can get an erode node and attach that in. And this is all basically with the same thing that I'm creating over here. That's already in the script. And I want to then take this and close out our other properties and stretch this out a bit in my width. So I can put, again, this is your creative decision. I can make this a bit wider or increase that value a bit more. And I also need to, as you see, make sure I need to change that to RGBA, or at least to an alpha, so that I'm creating that alpha. So again, that's up to your decision, how large you want that center core to be. And I'm changing the width and the height separately so that I don't have something that goes too tall. All right. And then again, I can add a blur for creative decision and things like that. So these then basically have created this element here. Revealing that on, widening that out a bit, and adding a bit of a softer blur on that. Same ideas. And in that roto paint node, I've then changed some of those other strokes. Can ignore those earlier ones, and this was the one that I had tweaked here. And as you see, I kind of cheated that a little bit at the beginning on frame 1 and just started that off so that once I blur it and animate it, that I have a good animation, quite visible, and a good matte with a bit more solid center earlier on in the sequence. So taking all of that animation then, which reveals my core, going back here, and I'm going to merge multiply those two elements so that in the end I create my animation of that core coming on through that smoke element. So this is obviously going to give me that really nice detail in there. I generally have to go back to that paint animation, and as I've animated this and seen it and looked at and tested out, I may then slightly change my course and redo my paint stroke to maybe include some more detailed areas or some more interesting parts of that smoke, things like that. And those are things that you can just keep going back to that roto paint node and creating one new stroke very easily. So multiplying those two together gives me that center core. Then I've just applied a very simple grade to that, giving it a bit of a green color, nice hot core center, or if you're doing a volcano, obviously you can do sort of a red, something that whatever suits your comp that you need it for. Then I want to then distort this element. I want to start to give it a bit of a heat haze kind of effect to exaggerate its importance, to exaggerate its effect in the shot. So we'll go through creating a nice generated heat haze element and distorting that element. First, let's get a noise node here. Noise nodes are really excellent for generating Perlin noise filter type of effects. And I am going to make this noise node and attach that to a reformat node so that I can actually just create a small area, because the area that we want to affect really is just down here in this area. So sometimes Perlin noise nodes can be a little bit slow if they're rendered at a very much larger res, especially if you're dealing with full 2K 2048 by 1556 type of elements for film reds. So I just need to make it fairly small, and then I'm going to resize that later. So if we take a look at this noise node, and just looking at the basic properties here, I can change the XY scale. All right, so that's going to change that size of that Perlin filter pattern. And then the animating the Z value here eventually, which we'll do by driving that by an expression. that can give you a nice generating element there. So we'll come back to animating that particular node. Then once that's set up here, this is the noise element that I've generated for this particular script. I then set up an emboss node here with two different setups. One has an angle of 90 degrees and the other one has an angle of 180. So it just gives me two variations then, and which I will separate to be the U and the V channels eventually when putting that into the motion layer in order to drive the iDistort node and to drive the distortion. After each one, I put an add node in here, and putting that together, as I've added this note here, any pixel of its input here, especially any pixel that in this case is less than 0.5, then say for instance that pixel is 0.3. If I put a value of negative 0.5 in the add, it's basically saying negative 0.5 plus that current pixel, 0.3, which come out to a negative number. So that now gives me positive and negative values, which will give me a nice integration of forward and backwards motion. So if I turn my zebra stripe on, you'll start to see that I get positive and negative values, which I want. And so that is done for both sides. Bring that together into a copy node just by copying the red channel into the red channel. So now I have a combination of those two in the two different channels. Then I'm going to shuffle that result, the red and the green, and I'm going to put that into a motion layer. A motion layer is one of the default layers in Nuke, so if you get a new shuffle node, you'll see and you'll be able to add that in. Your U and your V channels are there. And then here I want to set up the blue and the alpha to have a value of black. So that then creates my motion layer, which later on again will be used in the iDistort. I then want to reformat this back up, so then I can now have the full size. And since I'm just using this as a displace type of source, the softening that will happen from the redistort is fine, because eventually I may actually blur the element as well even. And here I can blur that depending on the type of motion that I need. That will go into the main core here, which will drive the actual animation of the distortion. So taking that green element that's been revealed on, I then get a copy node here and copying the motion layer that is coming from the result of that distortion source that I created. Copying that motion layer to my B pipe stream. So now if I look at the result of the copy node in that motion layer, I now have that information, that animating noise node. Go back to my RGBA. And then in the iDistort node here, I brought up the scale, told the UV channels to use that motion layer that exists, that we've just piped in. And then take a look at this full screen and play this out a bit. You can start to see a little bit of distortion in there. So let's go back a few steps and create the animation. To control the particular animation in here in the Z value, I can create another node that's going to control this value instead of having to animate it at the beginning, at the end, in order to get a nice moving element. So I can use a no-op node, which is sort of a null node. Very handy for a lot of different things. And I'm going to create a basic custom user knob. Right mouse click in this top neutral area, and I'll go to Manage User Knobs. And I get the pop-up menu, and I can go and add a floating point slider. And here I'll call this similar to what I've done for the other one. Speed control, I'll call this 2, just because I've set up one already here. I can copy and then paste that same information in here, and my slider will be called that, but if I don't put any field in here, it'll just automatically take this information. And then down here at the bottom, I need to then tell it what is my maximum and what is my minimum. So I think I'll probably set about 5, so 0 to 5, and I can always go back and change it if I find the value of 5 is too high. Hit OK. And then you see it's now created a custom slider here. Hit done. And it's a custom slider has now been called speed control 2. So in my noise node here, in this Z value, I want to add that expression. So I can go to my animation curve here, the animation menu, and go to add expression, or the hotkey is, while your cursor's in this field, hit the equal sign. That will bring up my dialog box. And I'm going to type in a fairly common expression, frame, which will generate a number here each time I go forward in my timeline. And I'll say multiply this by the node name. In this case, it's called no op1. But I can, as you see, change the name. I've called this one control, so you could do the same as well. And then dot the parameter that I want it to use. So use speed underscore control 2. And if your expression works out correctly, you should see basically a value here. Or if you have an error, then your expression is still a bit off. Hit OK. Turn on Alt-E. Alt-E is going to give me, show me the links of expressions of which nodes are linking to which. So it's a very nice way to see what's controlling what. And now if you see the value in my Z is 0, because my control is set to 0, as I bring that value up and look at the result here, I can see how that value is changing. So let's start, say, at value of 2. Play this out, and you see it's quite a fast moving. So I can then obviously bring that value down, slow it down quite a bit. And then again, also the size of this is going to be determined. So it depends a lot on the type of effect that you're trying to get. I'm trying to get a very tight kind of heat haze, so I will bring this value down a bit and get a very small, tighter pattern. If you are doing something for a completely different type of effect and you're trying to displace something a bit more softer and a bit more cloud-like, then bringing that size up will help. So that's going to be a really nice way to control that as well. The other things too that I need to set up in the noise node here are the transform. So I want to animate basically my Y value, because this element that I'm creating is increasing in its Y, so it's creeping up and going through that smoke element. So I can then set a keyframe here in my Y, and then enter a value here, maybe about 150 to start off. And then if I bring this speed value down for just now, you'll be able to see that basically now that heat haze will be rising, which is a nice effect. And then I increase this depending on what I need. So that setup is very handy, and that's what's been done here with setting up these particular nodes with a controller here and generating this type of element here. So this generates this type of pattern for a nice tight rising inner core heat haze. Then creating two of these versions, one for the inner core and then another version by just copying and pasting that template script now. And this is going to control the more overall heat haze on the outside. So one iDistort being for that inner, and then another iDistort, another setup for being the outer part or the overall heat haze. So this one will be a faster, slightly more tighter pattern, hence being at the epicenter and the core, and this one will be a bit slower and a slightly larger pattern. If we take a look at these settings here for the noise and also for the controller, you'll see the differences between those two patterns. So Combining those all together, then we've got our two eye distorts, and then I merge plus those together, giving that core both now distorting very nicely at two different rates. Then I go back to that inner core in order to generate a matte. So go back to my source. Again, this is all procedural. I don't need to create any articulated mattes, no roto. And use a grade node in order to give a bit more hotter center alpha channel, because I want to use this as a matte now. Because I've raised these white point values, and if you have as well raised your multiply, your matte may become have values higher than 1, which I don't want. So I want to make sure in this grade node I'm going to turn the white clamp on, and now my matte is now guaranteed to be 0 and 1, clamping those values. I want to then expand that out again to give a bit more width, all right, because this will then be used as a matte into the eye distort for the overall smoke parts. Shuffle that matte now into the A channel, just makes it a bit easier, and then add a bit of a blur to soften those edges. That becomes a mask input into the eye distort. And looking at our element here, before and after, it just distorts in that certain area. So if I go to the eye distort here and turn that value on and off, you can see the effect of how much area is just being controlled. So that's a nice option to do. Bring that all together when I plus that together, and then I'm going to add that glow, and the glow is based off, again, that distorted core. And I can just set up those glow settings depending on how I want that glow to look like. Plus those together. In the merge plus nodes at any point, you always have control here of how much those values can change, or how much of your mixing in. So actually, if I were to swap my inputs here, I would have this a bit more correct and be able to set how much of that glow I want to be apparent. Bringing that down all together, and then adding the godrays in. The godrays, basically same idea. I go back to that core element, and I'm going to pull a Lumi key from that, generating a matte. And then get a godray node here, and just setting again my setups here so that I've moved my center and my translate a bit to give me a very specific direction. So it just all depends on the direction that you want according to your light source. And then I've put this Lumi key in the matte of just that core, inverted that, and put that mask input into the godrays. And if we take a look at the properties of the godrays here, if I turn that mask on and off, you'll see the difference then. So it just allows me to kind of add a bit more of that element in to that particular output of the godray, and then I can merge plus that result with my existing comp. So before and then after, and bringing that all together and increasing again a bit of that hot core. I want to try and still maintain as much detail as I can in that center core. I don't want it to go of a flat green color or flat color in the end. Still maintaining as much detail in your highlights and detail in your shadows is really going to keep that shot looking with a nice tonal range and a nice sort of more filmic type of look. And again, that mix value here, I can animate if I want to, or bring that to whatever value that I would like in order for those godrays to show. Basically, a lot of this is procedural, so the godrays are animating on at the rate that this is being revealed through that roto paint. So quite a lot of procedural elements. Again, very little roto, only just a few garbage mats if possible. And then at the end, I get a really nice animated effect. So then playing this out again, I then get a really nice reveal on. And then looking into the details of it, I've got a nice tighter heat haze from that core, and then a little bit of heat haze on the edges of the other smoke parts. So not too obvious, but fairly subtle enough that it gives you an effect that there's something quite important happening in there. So I hope that gives you some ideas to generating your own types of elements and using the heat haze effect for a variety of different uses. Again, it's very handy for adding a bit of ripple onto a still image of water in order to animate your background a bit, put a bit more life into that. And animating your strokes, your write-on strokes, is very handy too for more procedural reveals as well. So hope you can add this to some cool comps, and thanks for watching. Bye.